Penguin Random House Audio presents Countries of Origin, a novel by Javier Fuentes. Read for you by Timothy Andrés Pabon. 1. I grew up loving a country that didn't love me back. The United States had been my home since I was 8 years old, and for more than a decade, I believed that a strong will would make things right. But a country can't love you back, and a strong will only gets you so far. I had changed into my street clothes and was throwing my chef's whites in the hamper to be dry cleaned when Chef called, asking me to meet at his apartment. It was on the top of the townhouse whose other floors were home to Le Bourrelet, Manhattan's first Michelin 3-star restaurant. None of the employees had ever been to his home, not even the occasional hostess he brought into his office. I kept the invitation secret to avoid giving more ammunition to my coworkers, already jealous of our relationship. Looking at my spotless station, I feared that Chef had finally learned about my fake Social Security number. It was an illogical thought after so many years working at the restaurant and paying taxes. But I was undocumented, and logic only applies when you have papeles. Instead of taking the interior stairs that connected the restaurant to his apartment, I said goodbye like every other night and left through the service entrance, making sure not to slip on the frozen loading dock. As I turned the corner of 83rd Street and 5th, the bitter March wind stung my face with slivers of ice. I made my way up the narrow staircase, my winter boots barely fitting on the steps. I had expected the upper floor of the townhouse to be well maintained, but the white walls had yellowed and the paint on the door was peeling as if the wood was shedding its skin. "Entrez," Chef said after I knocked. He was so proud of being Parisian that he not only kept his strong accent, but spoke French to every customer whether they understood him or not. He read Le Monde every afternoon, mostly drank wines from Provence, and wheezed from smoking 2 packs of Gauloise a day. Living abroad seemingly had only made him more French. I pushed open the door and took off my boots before entering the apartment. Holding an empty glass in one hand and a cigarette in the other, Chef paced the room, cradling the phone with his shoulder, the creaking of the wood floor muffled by several Persian rugs. Faded issues of Paris Match were piled up against a balcony door, the light of the lamppost across the street faintly filtering in. He pointed at a sofa, and I sat next to a stuffed red fox as Chef, speaking softly, crossed into the other room. "Au revoir, princesse," I caught before he hung up. Dressed in his signature 3-piece black suit and burgundy loafers, Chef looked exhausted. His forehead was lined with deep wrinkles. His eyes no longer sparkled. Maybe he had looked that way for a while, and it was only now, away from the kitchen, that I was able to see it. 8:30 in Paris, he said, glancing at a grandfather clock that marked 2:30 in the morning. "I'm the first voice they hear when they wake up. Haven't missed one matin." "That's nice," I said, unsure how to continue. Chef unfastened his collar and loosened his tie, but kept his jacket on. He grabbed a bottle of cognac from a bar cart and poured 2 glasses. "So, how are you?" "I'm good, Chef. It was a busy night." "So I heard. I can't believe I've had this cold for so long." "Yeah, it's pretty crazy." "Are you any better?" I asked because I wanted to know, but also to keep the conversation going. "Comme ci, comme ça. Tell me, how long have you been working for me?" Chef, speaking more slowly than usual, seemed to be struggling to find the right words. "It'll be 8 years in May, Chef." "C'est pas possible." "Yeah, right," I said, not wanting the awkwardness to sink in. I took a long sip of cognac and felt the muscles in my right leg cramp. "Well, Demetrio, I've been thinking a lot about you lately. You've pretty much learned everything I have to offer. I think it's time for you to move on." He dragged on his cigarette for a while. Moving on could mean many things, but at that moment, it only meant one thing. I was being let go. The cognac, which had traveled smoothly down my throat, suddenly burned its way through my stomach. I could feel beads of sweat forming on my face. I turned my head and looked at the stuffed fox with its defiant teeth, its mount covered in dust. Santé, 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 Chef said, refilling his glass. I grabbed a folded paper towel from my back pocket to control my sneezing. What do you mean, Chef? I smiled as if I did not understand what he was trying to say. Oh, you're not getting fired, if that's what you're thinking. That's not at all what I meant. I released a nervous laugh that didn't sound like me. At this point, you're in charge of our dessert menu. And I can't even remember the last time I suggested something you hadn't already explored. You're one of the most talented pastry chefs in the city. And it's not just me saying it. It's fucking Frank Bruni. If you were in Paris, that'd be a different story. The competition there is brutal. You know, it's part of our ADN, the DNA, whatever. He sucked one last drag from the cigarette before stubbing it out in the ashtray. Not knowing what to do with so much silence, I took another long sip from my glass, lighting my throat on fire and wondering whether his words were truly what he thought, or he was just now trying to make up for the misunderstanding. In any case, my friend, Marcel Boitenier, one of the heads of the Culinary Institute, said you should apply for a scholarship. There are very few of them, but that shouldn't be a problem, he said triumphantly. You would only need to fill out some forms to get federal student aid. It was so quiet. I could hear Chef's breathing and the distant murmur of voices coming from the bar downstairs. Looking into his eyes, I felt ashamed, small, and expendable. It had been so many years of living with the secret, and there had been periods when I didn't think about it for a whole day, though the fear was always there, lurking in shadows, waiting for the right moment to come back with renewed force. Even though the decision to become undocumented had not been mine, but made by others, I was the one forced to live with it. At first, Chef seemed confused by my lack of excitement, but he might have thought I was overwhelmed by the news. To the future, he said, pouring more fire into our glasses and raising his. I fixed my gaze on a marble bust resting on a side table and heard the words trapped in my head slowly being released into the air. I don't have papers. He kept his glass up, taking time to interpret what I had just said. The right papers, I added, as if it needed an explanation. Now it was Chef who did not understand. How so? He said after a long pause. You've been here for so long. He put the glass on the table and stood still for a while. His face looked as if he were going through a long list. Then he said, We'll get you the right papers. We polished off the bottle of cognac while I told him about a part of my past I had shared with very few others. Growing up in the Loisada, going to public school 64 on East 10th, and losing my accent watching MASH. He was surprised that I had been able to attend school and that many of my classmates were also undocumented. I talked about Mr. Banks, the head of the school, a local hero who helped all students who were recent immigrants navigate the bureaucracy of their new country and find aid that wasn't dependent on the color of their passport, and how, in trying to fit in and become American, we avoided speaking Spanish except when we cursed, when we fought, which was more often than I would have liked, and when we cried. Since Chef seemed genuinely interested in my past, I went on about my first job cleaning pots and pans at Rio Mar, a long-gone Spanish restaurant on Little West 12th, whose kitchen was forever under siege from an army of gigantic roaches. How every Saturday at 2 a.m, after the dining room had emptied and the tables were set for brunch, I would buy a phone card at a nearby deli and talk to my mother from a payphone, always in alleys and
Sample complete. Ready to continue?